A glass
This
tower
move into the
rises
European
42
market
floors
is
above
exactly what we
Seattle.
needed.
Rain streaks down its windows.
Absolutely, the
Inside a
timing couldn't
conference
be
room
better.
full of tailored suits and old money. Laughter, the easy kind. The kind that comes from people who have never once worried about tomorrow. At the far end of the table, a boy sits alone. 18. Worn jacket. Sneakers with the sole peeling off. He is holding an envelope. Inside the envelope, $1. The room laughs harder. The boy folds the bill in half, then in half again, slides it into the pocket over his heart, stands. The chair scrapes marble. The laughter stops. He walks out. Nobody in that room knows what the dollar is hiding. Nobody knows who sent it. Nobody knows that in 30 days every person laughing will wish they hadn't. The old man who wrote that will knew exactly what he was doing. And the boy they just laughed at is about to find out why. Ethan Carver was 18 years old the day he walked out of the county foster home for the last time. Everything he owned fit inside one backpack. The zipper was broken on one side. He'd fixed it with a safety pin 3 years ago, and the pin had held ever since. Which tells you something about Ethan. Or maybe about safety pins. Or maybe about what happens when you grow up with nothing. You learn to make things hold. 2 t-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, a toothbrush he'd stolen from a donation bin because the one they gave him had bristles that splayed out like a dead spider, and a letter. The letter made no sense. It came from a law firm, downtown Seattle, the kind of firm that had its name etched into marble above the door, 3 last names and a comma, the kind of place that sent letters on paper so thick you could practically hear the money in the fibers. The letter said Ethan Carver was required to attend the reading of a will. The will belonged to a man named Henry Blackwell. Now, if you lived in Seattle, if you'd ever looked up at the skyline and seen those tall glass towers catching the light off the bay, then you knew that name. Henry Blackwell, the billionaire, the builder, the man whose name was stamped on half the buildings downtown like he'd signed the city itself. Ethan had never met him. As far as Ethan knew, he had no family. None. Not a single person on this earth who shared his blood and knew his face and would pick up the phone if he called. That was the thing about Ethan Carver. The central fact of him. The thing written in every file, every report card, every caseworker's notes, no known family. 3 words. His whole life in 3 words. But the letter came with a bus ticket and an address on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the bay. So he went. Because when you have nothing to lose. And when someone hands you a bus ticket to somewhere, you take the ride. Even if it makes no sense, especially then. The office looked like something out of a movie Ethan had never been able to afford to see. Marble floors, the kind that echo when you walk. Quiet assistants in heels that clicked like little clocks counting someone else's money. Tailored suits. Windows that stretched from the floor all the way to the ceiling. And through those windows, the whole city. Laid out below like it belonged to whoever was standing up here looking down at it. Ethan became very aware of the sneakers on his feet. They were scuffed. One sole was peeling away at the toe. He'd glued it back twice. The glue held for about a week each time and then gave up. Which, again, tells you something about the difference between glue and safety pins, and maybe about the difference between things that hold and things that don't. He sat down at a long table. The table was surrounded by strangers, all of them older, all of them dressed in clothes that didn't come with price tags because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. They smelled like leather and something floral and money. That specific smell. You know the one. It's not perfume exactly. It's the absence of worry. Worry has a smell. These people didn't have it. Ethan had it. He had it in his jacket, in his shoes, in the way he sat, slightly forward, slightly tense. The posture of a person who had learned a long time ago that chairs were temporary, that rooms were temporary, that everything was temporary, except the feeling of not belonging. That one stayed. The lawyer began to read, and one by one, the fortune was handed out. Properties in cities Ethan had never visited. Shares in companies he'd never heard of. Numbers with so many zeros they stopped meaning anything. Like someone had spilled a jar of them across the page and just left them there. All of it going to one man. The man sat at the head of the table. Silver hair, cut close, a tailored gray suit that fit him like it had been born on his body, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than every car in the foster home parking lot combined. And that's saying something because there were 11 cars in that lot. Ethan had counted them. He counted things. It was a habit. When you can't control anything in your life, you count what's there, just to make sure it hasn't disappeared yet. The man had an easy smile, the kind that comes from never once in your entire life worrying about where the next meal was coming from. Marcus Blackwell. Ethan didn't need anyone to tell him the name. The resemblance to the photos in the building lobby was right there, in the jaw, in the posture, in the way he owned the room without trying, the way gravity itself seemed to organize around him. The lawyer read on. More properties, more shares, more zeros, and then the lawyer turned to Ethan, and the room shifted. Just slightly. A change in the air. A held breath nobody quite notices they're holding. The lawyer slid a small envelope across the table. To Ethan Carver. The lawyer said it evenly, like he was reading a grocery list. Mr. Blackwell leaves $1. $1. The room went quiet, and then somebody laughed. Marcus Blackwell laughed, not loud, not cruel, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. $1, Marcus said. He shook his head, amused. Well, the old man always did have a sense of humor. A few of the others chuckled. Polite. The way people laugh when the boss laughs. The way people laugh when they're glad the joke isn't about them. Ethan said nothing. He looked down at the envelope. Opened it. Inside was a single dollar bill. Old. Creased soft at the folds. The kind of bill you might get as change at a gas station and never look at twice. The kind of bill that had been through 100 hands and 100 pockets and meant nothing to any of them. Something rose up in his chest. Not anger. Exactly. Something older than anger. Something he'd carried so long it didn't have a name anymore. It was just there. Like a second heartbeat. The feeling he'd had sitting in waiting rooms while families walked past him toward other children. The feeling he'd had standing in donation lines at Christmas, watching kids hold up new toys while he held up a used one with the sticker already peeled halfway off. The feeling of being the leftover, the remainder, the one nobody counted. He'd practiced swallowing that feeling for 18 years, so he swallowed it now. He folded the dollar bill in half, then in half again. Carefully, the way you fold something that matters, and he slid it into the inside pocket of his thin jacket, the pocket right over his heart. He didn't think about it that way at the time, but that's where it went, over his heart, because sometimes your hands know things the rest of you hasn't figured out yet. Then he stood up. The chair scraped against the marble, loud. In the quiet room it sounded like a crack in something. Everybody looked at him. "Thank you for your time," Ethan said. His voice didn't shake. He made sure of that. Because you can lose everything. You can stand in a room full of people who have more than you will ever touch and receive $1 from a dead man you never knew. But you do not let your voice shake. That is the one thing they do not get to take. And he walked out. Behind him, 42 floors above the city, a fortune was still being divided. Bank accounts, office towers, a name that meant something. Power and money and all the things the world agrees to call important. And Ethan Carver walked out with $1. The rain started while he was inside. Seattle does that. Gray all morning. Patient. Like it's thinking about it. Then the sky just opens. Quiet and cold. No thunder. No warning. Just water. coming down like the city itself was crying about something it refused to name. Ethan stepped out of the glass tower and the rain hit him immediately. It soaked through his thin jacket in about a minute. He pulled the jacket tighter anyway. Old habit. The gesture couldn't keep him warm, and he knew that. But he did it because that's what you do when you're cold and you've got nothing else. You pull what you have closer. Even when what you have isn't enough, you hold on to it. The street was full of people who knew where they were going. Umbrellas, taxis, a man in a long coat barking into his phone about a deal that couldn't wait, a woman in heels stepping over a puddle like it had personally offended her. Headlights smeared yellow across the wet pavement. Ethan walked. No umbrella, no taxi money, just a bus ticket for the ride home, and one folded dollar bill that a dead stranger had decided he was worth. And as he walked, he did the math. Because Ethan always did the math. That was the other thing about him. The thing the system never noticed because the system wasn't looking. He did the math on everything. Not school math. Life math. Survival math. The kind that tells you if you eat one meal today, you can eat two tomorrow. How many days until the next check? How many hours until the next shift? He was 18 now, which meant the system was done with him. No more group home. No more monthly check from the state. No more caseworker named Grace Holloway, who forgot his birthday 2 years running but always remembered to lecture him about his grades. Always remembered to write things down in his file. Cold woman. Efficient. The kind of person who looked at you and saw a folder. Not a face. At least that's what Ethan thought. He had a studio apartment above a laundromat in South Seattle. He had a part-time job stocking shelves at night at a grocery store where the manager called him Kid and never learned his name. He had $400 saved in a coffee can under the bathroom sink, and he had Milo. The thought of the boy did something complicated in his chest. Worry and warmth all tangled up together like two hands gripping each other in the dark. Because Milo was the only thing in the world that was actually his, not by blood, not by paperwork, by something stronger than either. Ethan pulled his collar up and kept walking through the rain, somewhere above him. Way up there. The Blackwell name glowed on the side of a building, lit up gold against the gray sky, like a signature on the clouds. He didn't look up at it. The apartment above the laundromat was small enough that Ethan could touch two walls if he stretched out his arms. That's not a metaphor. He actually could. He'd measured. Because he measured things, counted things, mapped the dimensions of his life in numbers, because numbers were the one thing that didn't lie to him. People lied. Caseworkers lied. Families who said they'd keep him lied. Numbers just sat there, honest, indifferent, true. The heater rattled like it was thinking about quitting, a philosophical rattle, like it was weighing the pros and cons of continued existence. The paint peeled in the corners. The ceiling had a stain shaped like Florida, or maybe a dog, depending on how much sleep you'd had. It smelled, always, faintly of dryer sheets, from the machines running downstairs at all hours, sometimes lavender, sometimes that weird one that was supposed to smell like a mountain breeze, but smelled more like a chemical plant's idea of one. Ethan had gotten used to it the way you get used to anything, not because you like it, because your body decides that one more thing to complain about isn't worth the energy. But it was warm, and it was his. The next morning, Seattle woke under the same blanket of gray. Ethan sat at the little kitchen table with a paper bag from the corner store. Inside the bag was one loaf of cheap white bread, the kind that costs $1.19, the kind that's more air than wheat, the kind that fills your stomach for about 45 minutes, and then your stomach sends you a formal notice that it's been deceived. That was breakfast. That was, if he was honest, most of breakfast for the foreseeable future, until his next paycheck cleared, which was Thursday, 4 days away. Across from him sat Milo, 10 years old, skinny in the way that worried Ethan. Not starving skinny, just not enough skinny. The kind where a kid's body is spending all its energy growing upward, and there's nothing left over for filling out. Messy brown hair that no comb had ever won a fight against. Ethan had tried, with 3 different combs. The hair won every time. And eyes. Lord, the eyes on this kid. Too big. Too watchful. The eyes of someone who had learned way too early how to read a room. How to know when the grown-ups were about to start yelling. When the mood was about to shift. When it was time to get small. Time to be invisible. Time to be so quiet that the world might forget you were there. Because forgetting was safer than noticing. In a lot of the places Milo had been, noticing was the thing that came right before the bad thing. Ethan knew those eyes. He'd had them once, still did sometimes. In the mirror on mornings, he didn't want to look too closely. He tore the loaf of bread in half, looked at both pieces, then slid the bigger one across the table. "Eat," he said. "You've got school." Milo frowned at the bread, then at Ethan, then at the bread again. The kid had a frown that could win arguments, disapproving, focused. The frown of a tiny old man trapped in a 10-year-old's body. "You should take the big half," Milo said. "You're the one who had the fancy meeting yesterday." Ethan almost smiled. "Trust me, it wasn't that fancy." "Did you get money?" "Eat your breakfast. That's not a no. It's not a yes either." "Eat," Milo grumbled. But he ate, and Ethan watched him eat the way he always did. Carefully, making sure the kid got enough, not obvious about it. He'd learned not to be obvious because Milo was smart, scary smart, the kind of smart that notices when you're watching him eat, the kind of smart that notices the big half and the small half and which one you kept. That was the rule, the one rule Ethan had made for himself the day he talked the system into letting Milo stay with him. The kid eats first. The kid eats more. Every time. No exceptions. Provisional guardianship. That's what the court called it. Temporary. On paper. A trial run. The caseworker had actually used that phrase. A trial run. Like Milo was a car you took around the block to see if the steering pulled to the left. The kid had been getting bounced from home to home for 2 years. 7 placements. 7. By the time he was 9, that's a new zip code every 3.5 months. A new school, a new bed, a new set of rules to learn and a new set of adults to figure out, and a new set of reasons why it didn't work, and it was time to pack the garbage bag again. Because that's what they gave you. Not a suitcase, a garbage bag, black plastic, your whole life in a trash bag, like you were something being thrown away. Nobody wanted a 10-year-old with a temper and a file full of red flags. Nobody except Ethan, who looked at Milo and saw himself at that age, angry, because the world had given him every reason to be, watchful, because watching was how you survived, quiet in the way that isn't peaceful, quiet in the way that's holding something in. So Ethan had stepped up, 18 years old, broke, part-time job, studio apartment above a laundromat. He'd stood in front of a judge and a social worker and made his case. And his case wasn't fancy. His case wasn't eloquent. His case was this. I know what it's like. That's it. That's what he said. I know what it's like. Because I was him. And somebody should have showed up for me. And nobody did. So I'm showing up for him. And somehow, on a provisional basis, with monthly check-ins, and a stack of conditions thick as a phone book. They'd let him keep the boy. It wasn't permanent, not yet. The hearing for permanent guardianship was 2 months out, and Ethan knew exactly how it would go if he showed up looking unstable, looking poor, looking like a kid raising a kid in an apartment that smelled like a laundromat and had a ceiling stain shaped like Florida. He didn't let himself think about that too much. He just made sure Milo ate. Milo was halfway through his bread when headlights swept across the window. Ethan looked up. A black SUV had pulled to a slow stop on the street below. Shiny, dark-tinted windows, the kind of car that did not belong on this block. The kind of car that in this neighborhood usually meant trouble of one flavor or another. and Ethan's stomach tightened the way it always did, because in his life, unexpected things were almost never good things. Then came the knock, 3 knocks, even, patient. Not a cop knock, not a landlord knock, something else. Ethan stood, put himself between the door and Milo without quite meaning to, just moved there. Another old habit. "Stay there," he said quietly, and Milo stayed. Because Milo understood quiet instructions. Milo understood the voice that meant this might be something. Ethan opened the door and froze. Standing in the hallway was a tall man in a charcoal suit. Older, maybe 60, maybe more. Hair gone silver gray, cut close to the skull. A face that gave nothing away, like a wall you couldn't see over. Calm eyes that had clearly seen a great deal and decided to keep most of it to themselves. Ethan recognized him, the lawyer, from the day before, the one who'd read the will, the one who'd slid the envelope across the table with the dollar inside. "Good morning, Mr. Carver?" the man said. His voice was even, courteous, polished but not warm, or maybe warm underneath the polish. Hard to tell. He'd introduced himself yesterday, somewhere in the blur of marble and humiliation, but Ethan hadn't caught it, hadn't been listening, had been too busy trying to breathe through the laughter. "Leonard Ashford," the man said now, as if he'd read the question on Ethan's face. "I was Henry Blackwell's attorney and personal counsel for 31 years. He paused. "May I come in?" Ethan didn't move for a second, because none of this made sense. Because rich lawyers in expensive suits did not show up at apartments above laundromats at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. Because the will had been read. The dollar had been handed over. The joke was complete. Punchline delivered. Room laughed. There was no reason for this man to be standing in his hallway. Except here he was. "It's not much," Ethan said, finally stepping back. "But come in." Leonard Ashford stepped inside. His eyes moved across the room, and Ethan watched them move, watched the man take in the peeling paint, the rattling heater, the half loaf of bread on the table, the skinny kid sitting very still in his chair, watching the stranger with those 2 big eyes. Ashford took it all in, and his expression didn't change. He didn't wince, didn't pity, didn't do that thing people do when they walk into a poor person's home. That little micro-expression, that flicker, the one that says, "Oh," the one that says, "I see." Ethan knew that flicker. He'd seen it 100 times, on teachers, on caseworkers, on the parents of kids who invited him over once and never again. Ashford didn't do it. He just looked, the way a man looks when he's recording something he intends to remember, taking inventory, filing it away in some internal cabinet that would never be opened again unless it needed to be. Then he turned back to Ethan. "I believe," Leonard Ashford said, "we need to talk about that dollar." Ethan crossed his arms. "If you came all the way down here to explain the joke," he said, "you can save it. I got the message loud and clear yesterday." Ashford shook his head. Slowly. Once. "It wasn't a joke," he said, and something in the way he said it, something in the weight of those 4 words, made Ethan go quiet. Ashford reached into his coat, pulled out a slim folder, set it down on the kitchen table, right next to the bread, as if the 2 things belonged in the same world, as if the distance between them was shorter than you'd think. "Your grandfather," Ashford said carefully, "was a very strategic man." Ethan blinked. "My? What?" "Your grandfather. Henry Blackwell." The rattling heater filled the silence. The dryer sheets drifted up from downstairs. Milo had stopped chewing. He was watching Ethan's face now, not the stranger's, because Milo always watched Ethan's face. That was how the kid navigated, not by what people said, by what the people he trusted felt about what was being said. I don't have a grandfather, Ethan said. The words came out flat, automatic, like a recording. He'd said versions of that sentence his whole life. So many times it had worn smooth, like a stone in a river. No edges left. I don't have parents. I don't have family. I don't have anybody. You learn to say it without flinching. You learn to say it the way you say, the sky is gray. Just a fact. Just the weather of your life. I don't have anybody. That's kind of the whole thing about me. Henry Blackwell, Leonard Ashford said, was your grandfather. Silence. The heater rattled. Milo held his bread in midair, frozen, a statue of a boy holding a piece of cheap white bread that had suddenly become the least interesting thing in the room. Ethan stared at the lawyer, waited for the punchline. It didn't come. That's not possible, Ethan said. It is entirely possible, and it is true. Then Ethan's voice caught. He hated that it caught. He forced it level. Then why? He said. Why would he leave me $1 if I'm his? He couldn't even say the word. Grandson. The word sat in his mouth like a foreign object, something that belonged to other people. Why $1? Leonard Ashford opened the folder, slid a single document across the table. Because, Ashford said, leaving you nothing at all would have been a mistake. A legal one. He tapped the document with one finger. If your name had simply been absent from the will, your uncle could have argued you were overlooked, an accidental omission, in probate law. That opens a door. It can trigger a challenge. Years of litigation. He looked at Ethan. $1 is not an accident. $1 proves your grandfather knew exactly who you were, knew you existed, and chose. The dollar isn't an insult, Mr. Carver. It's a lock on a door. It keeps your uncle out. Ethan looked down at the document. The legal language was dense. He didn't understand half the words, but he understood the shape, the architecture of what Ashford was saying. Wait, he said. My uncle. You mean the guy who laughed? Marcus Blackwell, Ashford said. Yes, your father's older brother. My father. The words landed somewhere deep, somewhere old, somewhere Ethan had boarded up a long time ago and told himself to never go back to, because there was nothing there. Just a blank, a space in his file where a name should be, a line that said, unknown. My father, Ethan said slowly. You knew my father. I knew him, Ashford said, and for just a moment, something moved behind those calm eyes, something that had been held in place for a very long time, held so carefully that you might not notice it was there at all, unless you happened to look at exactly the right second. Grief. That's what it was. Old grief, held like a stone in a closed hand. Your father was a good man. Mr. Carver, Ashford said. I'd like to tell you about him, but not here, not like this. He reached into his briefcase, and from it he drew a small object, set it on the table. A key. Not a house key, heavier than that. Old metal, dark with age. This morning, Ashford said, if you're willing, we're going to take a drive. Somewhere your uncle doesn't know exists. He paused. Somewhere your grandfather wanted you to see. Ethan looked at the key on the table, then at the lawyer, then at Milo, who was staring at all of it with his mouth slightly open, bread forgotten in his hand. Every instinct Ethan had was screaming at him, because good things did not happen to kids like him. That was rule number 1, written in invisible ink on the inside of his skull when something looked too good. It was a trap, with the jaws still open, waiting, because hope, in Ethan's experience, was just the setup for the next disappointment. Hope was the con man in the nice suit who promises you a family and then drives you to another group home. Hope was the couple who takes you for a weekend and brings you back on Sunday, like a library book they'd decided not to finish. He'd learned that lesson early. He'd learned it hard. But he looked at the key, and he thought about the blank space where his father should be, the space that had been empty for 18 years, and he thought about a grandfather he'd never known, who'd put his name in a will. Not much, but not nothing, not unknown, not forgotten. "I have to take Milo to school first," Ethan said. It was not a yes, but it wasn't a no. Leonard Ashford almost smiled. Almost. The way a mountain almost moves. "Of course," he said. An hour later, Ethan sat in the back of the black SUV as it pulled away from the laundromat and left the city behind. He dropped Milo at the elementary school 6 blocks away, walked him to the gate, watched him walk through, watched the kid turn around twice to look back at the strange black car idling on the curb. His face had that expression, the one that said, "I'm memorizing this." Something is changing, and when things change, things get taken away. "I'll pick you up at 3, Ethan had told him, kneeling down, eye level. "Promise, promise." And he meant it. He always meant it. Promises were the one thing Ethan Carver never broke, because he knew exactly what a broken promise felt like from the inside. It felt like a garbage bag, black plastic. Your whole life getting thrown away again. Now the city thinned out around the highway. The towers gave way to neighborhoods. The neighborhoods gave way to trees. The road climbed into the foothills east of Seattle, where the evergreens grew tall and close and blocked out what was left of the gray sky. Leonard Ashford sat across from him. Quiet. He hadn't pushed, hadn't filled the silence with small talk. He just sat and let the silence be what it was. Ethan appreciated that more than he could have said. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Tell me about him," he said. "My father." Ashford was quiet for a moment, watching the trees go by. The pines were dusted with snow up here, white on green on gray. "His name was James," Ashford said. "James Blackwell. He was the younger of Henry's 2 sons, and he was, in my opinion, the better of the 2 by a wide margin." "What was he like?" "Patient," Ashford said. The word came out like he'd been holding it for a long time. "Honest to a fault. He had a way of listening that made people feel heard, really heard. Not the fake kind where someone waits for you to stop talking so they can say the thing they were going to say anyway." Ashford paused. Henry used to say James was the only person in the company who could deliver bad news and make you grateful for it. A faint, sad smile. He was being groomed to take over. Everyone knew it. The board, the employees, and his brother knew it most of all. Ethan's hands had gone tight in his lap. What happened to him? Ashford didn't answer right away. The trees went by. "That," Ashford said at last, "is a conversation for a different room. There's a letter. Your grandfather wrote it for you in his own hand. He wanted you to hear it from him, not from me." He looked at Ethan. "We're almost there." The road narrowed, turned off the highway, became a long, private drive, unmarked, easy to miss. The SUV slowed. Tall iron gates stood across the road, half hidden by snow-dusted pines. Ashford leaned forward. The driver entered a code. The gates swung open without a sound, and there at the end of the drive, it stood. Not quite a house, not quite a mansion, something in between. A secluded mountain estate set against a wall of towering pines, the roof and the ground soft under a fresh layer of snow, stone and dark timber, tall windows reflecting the white world around them. It looked like something out of a dream Ethan had never allowed himself to have, because dreaming costs something. And Ethan had learned early that the price of wanting things you can't have is higher than the price of never wanting them at all. This was his, Ethan said quietly. This was his private retreat, Ashford said. Off the books, held through a trust that has nothing to do with the rest of the estate. Marcus doesn't know it exists. No one does, outside of two people. Myself, and as of this morning, you. They got out. The cold hit Ethan's lungs, clean and sharp. Nothing like the wet gray of the city. His scuffed sneakers crunched in the snow. He felt very strongly that he did not belong here, that at any second someone would come out and tell him there had been a mistake. But no one came. Ashford led him inside, through quiet rooms full of books and dark wood and the smell of cold stone and old fires, down a staircase into a study buried in the lower floor, walls lined with shelves, a stone fireplace cold now, dark with old ash, and there in the center of the room, set into the floor on a raised stone base, a large steel safe. Ashford crossed to it, took the old metal key from his coat. Mr. Carver, he said, what you're about to see, your grandfather kept hidden for a reason. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. Are you certain you want to? Ethan looked at the safe. His heart was going so hard he could feel it in his throat. The dollar bill was still folded in his jacket pocket, right over that pounding heart. He thought about every closed door that had ever been shut in his face, every room he'd been told he wasn't allowed in, every time the world had decided before he even spoke that he didn't get to have what other people had. And now here was a door, and a man holding out the key, and telling him it was his choice. Open it, Ethan said. Ashford fit the key into the lock, turned it. A heavy click, the sound of something old giving way. The door swung open. Inside, neatly arranged, stacks of sealed envelopes, bound documents, account statements. Ethan leaned closer. The numbers on the top page swam, then resolved, then made him stop breathing. $50 million, held in trust, tied to accounts he didn't understand, in a language he didn't speak. But the number was clear enough. $50 million. Ethan took an unsteady step back. That's not. He started. That can't be. It is, Ashford said simply. But before Ethan could reach for anything, before his shaking hand could even rise toward the stacks, Ashford held out something else first, a single envelope, older than the rest, the paper slightly yellowed, and on the front, written in a careful, old-fashioned hand, one word, Ethan, just his first name, nothing else, as if the man who'd written it had known him, as if they'd been close, as if Ethan had been someone in this man's life all along, and not a stranger who'd been laughed out of a conference room the day before. He asked me to give you this, Ashford said quietly. Before anything else, before the money, before the rest of it. He was very clear about the order. Ethan took the envelope. His hands were not steady. He noticed that distantly, the way you notice something happening to someone else. He broke the seal, unfolded the page inside, and read, Ethan, if you are reading this, then Leonard has done his job, and I am gone, and we have run out of time to meet. I am sorry for that. The fault is mine, and I will explain it, though I doubt any explanation will be enough. Your father was the best of us. I do not say that to flatter the dead. I say it because it is true, and because I spent too many years failing to say it while he was alive. James had a kind of judgment that cannot be taught, the kind a man needs to be trusted with anything that matters. I meant for him to have everything. Your uncle knew that, and your uncle made certain it never happened. Ethan read on, about a development deal in Phoenix, about debt moved in the dark, about a brother who buried his own brother in ruin, quietly, cleverly, until there was nothing left. Your father lost everything, his standing, his name in this family, and not long after, in the dark place that ruin pushes a good man toward, I lost him too. Ethan read that line 3 times. I lost him too. His father hadn't abandoned him. His father had been destroyed. And then came the paragraph Ethan wasn't ready for. I knew about you. The words hit him like cold water. I have known about you since you were 3 years old. I know that will be hard to read. I know what it means. It means I knew where you were. And I left you there. In the homes, in the system, year after year. And I let you believe you had no one. Ethan's hand began to shake harder. He knew, Ethan said out loud. His voice came out strange, thin. He knew about me. Ashford said nothing, but he didn't look surprised. I want you to understand why, even if you can never forgive it. Marcus destroyed his own brother for a building. I had no doubt. None. What he would do to a child who stood between him and an inheritance. If I had claimed you, if I had brought you into this house and given you my name, I would have painted a target on your back that I could not protect you from. Not from a hospital bed, not from the grave. So I made a choice, the hardest choice of my life. I kept you hidden. I kept you poor and unknown and safe. I had a person watch over you from a distance, quietly, always quietly. Ethan stopped, read the line again, and again. The home you grew up in received funding for years that it never knew the source of. The shoes on certain children's feet, the roof that did not leak. That was me, reaching toward you the only way I dared. The woman who managed your file, Grace Holloway. She reported to me, every month, every year, 15 years. Ethan's breath left his body. Grace Holloway, the woman who forgot his birthday, who lectured him about his grades, who looked at him with that flat expression, like he was a folder, not a face. She wanted to tell you. She asked me 3 times. I said no. I told her if she got close to you, if anyone suspected she was more than a case manager, it would draw attention. And attention was the one thing I could not allow near you. She was not cold, Ethan. She was in pain, watching you grow up from arm's length, forbidden to reach. She did it for 15 years. She deserved better. So did you. Ethan sat down. He didn't decide to sit. His body just did it, dropped into the chair by the cold fireplace. 15 years. 15 years of thinking he was invisible, of thinking nobody saw him. And the whole time, someone was watching, someone was reaching, quietly, always quietly, the woman he'd resented. Grace, the one who doesn't care. Grace, the one who forgot my birthday. Grace who kept the roof from leaking. Grace who put shoes on his feet. Grace who watched him from arm's length and was never allowed to step closer. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I told myself it was protection. Perhaps it was only cowardice wearing protection's clothes. You will have to be the judge of that. You have every right to hate me. I would not blame you. The handwriting changed in the last part of the letter. Firmer, steadier. Instructions now. You have 30 days from the reading of the will. 30 days to gain controlling leverage over Blackwell Holdings. Buy the debt. Buy the influence. Do whatever is lawful and whatever is necessary. Leonard will guide you. He is the only man left in this world I trust completely. If you succeed, everything I built is yours to set right. If you fail, if the 30 days pass and Marcus still holds the company, the trust dissolves, the money is gone, and he wins for good. Make it right. Ethan. And at the bottom, no signature, just one line. I should have come for you. I'm sorry I waited until it was too late. Ethan lowered the letter. The room was very quiet. The fireplace gaped cold beside him. The safe stood open behind him. $50 million, and a dead man's apology. 30 days, Ethan said finally. His voice was rough. I'm 18. I stock shelves at night. I can barely read half the words on these papers. He gestured at the open safe. And he wants me to take down a company. A real company. From a man who's run it for years. Leonard Ashford stepped forward. Out of the shadow by the wall. Yes, Ashford said. That's insane. It is a great deal to ask, Ashford agreed. Possibly too much. Your grandfather knew that. He paused, but he also knew something else. And so do I. What? Ashford's calm eyes met his. Marcus Blackwell has spent his entire life facing people who had something to lose. Rivals with reputations, partners with families, board members with pensions. He knows exactly how to find the thing a man is afraid to lose and squeeze it until the man does what he wants. A small pause. He has never once faced someone with nothing left to lose. Ethan said nothing. He doesn't know your name, Ashford went on. He doesn't know your face. He laughed at you across a table yesterday and has already forgotten you exist. He thinks the only thing between him and the whole fortune was a single dollar and a joke. Ashford let that sit. He has no idea what your grandfather just handed you, and he has no idea who you are. Ethan looked down at the letter in one hand, then reached into his jacket with the other, took out the folded dollar bill, unfolded it, looked at it, old and creased and ordinary, the first thing his grandfather had ever given him, proof in soft-worn paper that an old man up in these mountains had known he existed. Too late, too quietly, but real. He folded the dollar back up, slipped it into the pocket over his heart. Okay, he said. Ashford raised an eyebrow. Okay, teach me. Whatever this is, however it works, teach me. He looked at the old lawyer. We've got 30 days. And for the first time since Ethan had met him, Leonard Ashford smiled. A real one, small but real, like a crack in a wall that had been holding something back for a very long time. Your father, Ashford said quietly, would have said exactly the same thing, in exactly that voice. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere down in the city, 42 floors above the streets, Marcus Blackwell was sitting in an office that wasn't really his, running a company he had stolen, with absolutely no idea that the boy he had laughed at the day before had just decided to take it all back. The clock had started, 29 days to go. The lessons began the next morning, and they did not stop. Leonard Ashford moved Ethan up to the mountain estate for the duration. It made sense. He explained it simply. The work needs privacy. The work needs quiet. And the work needs to happen somewhere Marcus Blackwell would never think to look. So Ethan packed his backpack again. 2 t-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, 1 folded dollar bill over his heart. Same backpack. Same safety pin holding the zipper shut. Same everything. Except this time he was walking into a house with more bedrooms than he could count. But he wasn't going alone. Because there was Milo. Ethan had thought about it for exactly 1 second. The boy was not staying behind in a studio apartment above a laundromat while Ethan disappeared into the mountains for a month. Not happening. Not negotiable. The kid goes where Ethan goes. Period. So Milo came too. New school enrolled within the week. A small one down in the foothills town. 23 kids total. A teacher who wore flannel and called everyone Bud. Milo was suspicious of the flannel, and the Bud, and the small class size. Because in Milo's experience, nice things were usually the thing that happened right before the rug got pulled. But he went, every morning, and Ethan drove him. A long, quiet ride through the pines, every single day, no matter what, because he'd promised, and Ethan did not break promises. Milo picked the bedroom with the window that looked out at the pines. First night. The kid stood at that window for a long time, just staring at the snow, at the trees, at the silence. Because silence was different up here. In the city, silence meant something was wrong. Silence meant somebody was about to yell. Up here, silence was just silence. Trees and snow and nothing bad about to happen. Milo stood there and he didn't trust it. You could see that in the way he held himself, standing slightly back from the glass, like if he pressed too close, the whole thing might vanish. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. He didn't say anything, because some things you just let a kid have. The first night in a room that might be safe, you don't narrate that. You just stand back and let the kid stare at the snow and decide for himself whether or not it's real. Then the work swallowed him whole. Every morning before the drive to school, and every afternoon after the drive back, Ashford sat him down in the underground study and taught him a world that ran underneath the one everyone else lived in, like plumbing, like wiring, the hidden infrastructure of money, who has it, who owes it, who controls it, and the difference between those three things. Companies that borrow money to grow, Ashford said, tapping a spreadsheet with a pen. Banks that lend it. Investors who buy and sell the borrowing itself, like chips at a table the size of a country. Most people think a company is owned by the people who hold its stock. Ashford leaned back. That's what they want you to think. It's not true. It's not the whole truth. A company is owned by whoever it owes. Stock is loud. Stock shows up in the newspaper. You buy a big block of stock. Alarms ring. Everyone turns to look. He set the pen down. Debt is quiet. Debt hides in the dark. And when a company is leaning on enough debt, the people who hold that debt can pull the floor out from under everyone above them. He looked at Ethan. Buying stock gets attention. Buying debt gets control. Ethan wrote that down in a notebook Ashford had given him. College ruled, blue cover. And in that notebook in handwriting that was messy and urgent and pressed hard into the paper, Ethan wrote down everything. Because here is the thing nobody had ever known about Ethan Carver. He was smart, not school smart. School had been a place he survived, not a place he shined. Too many moves, too many new classrooms, too many nights lying awake worrying about the wrong things to ever care about a worksheet. The system had stamped him average and moved on, the way a river moves on, without looking back. But the system had never put anything in front of him that mattered. This mattered, so Ethan learned. Fast. Faster than Ashford expected. And Ashford did not expect much from anyone. The boy absorbed it all, asked questions that made the old lawyer stop mid-sentence and reconsider things he'd been sure about for 20 years. Saw patterns 3 steps ahead, connections Ashford hadn't drawn himself until the kid traced them in that blue notebook. By the end of the first week, Ashford caught himself explaining something only once where he'd planned to explain it 3 times. Your father, Ashford said quietly that night, learned the same way. Once was enough for him, too. Ethan didn't look up from the page, but something in him warmed and ached at the same time. By the end of the first week, they were ready to make a move, a small one, a test. There was a tranche of distressed debt tied to Blackwell Holdings, a bundle of loans the company had taken on years ago for a project that never delivered. The loans were worth less than their face value, which meant they could be bought cheap, which meant whoever bought them would suddenly hold a piece of paper that said Blackwell Holdings owes me. We start here, Ashford said. Small. Careful. Ethan nodded. His heart was pounding. He'd never had more than $400 in his life. And now he was about to move real money. His grandfather's money. He should have felt powerful. He felt sick. But they needed help. Ashford knew people, but Ashford was known. And being known was dangerous now. They needed a face that wasn't connected to either of them, a financial consultant who could move quietly. Ashford made discreet calls, and a name came back. Julian Cross. Sharp, confident, mid-30s, dark hair, easy smile, the polish of a man who'd learned which fork to use a long time ago. He drove up to the estate in a car that cost more than the apartment above the laundromat, shook Ethan's hand with a grip that was exactly firm enough. "So," Cross said, smiling, "you're the mystery client." He looked around the study. "Don't worry, mystery is my specialty." Ethan didn't smile back. He didn't trust easy charm. He'd grown up around too many adults who smiled right up until the moment they didn't. Social workers who smiled while they told you it was time to pack the bag. Smiles were the anesthesia, the thing they gave you before the cut. But Cross was good. That much was obvious from the first hour. He knew the market's cold. He knew which sellers were desperate and which were pretending. He guided Ethan through the first purchase of distressed debt step by step, and when it was done, when Ethan sat there holding a piece of paper that said a sliver of Blackwell Holdings now answered to him, Julian Cross leaned back and grinned. "Welcome to the table, kid." And for one dangerous second, Ethan let himself feel it, the feeling of being at the table instead of outside it. That was the bait. The second deal came fast. Too fast, Ethan would realize later. That the speed was part of the design. The way a pickpocket bumps into you and apologizes. The politeness is the distraction. The speed is the theft. Julian Cross pushed for it. A larger bundle of bonds, available at a price that wouldn't last. They had to move now. Now. That word. The word that makes you stop thinking and start acting. The word that turns off the part of your brain that asks, "Wait. Why is this so urgent? What am I not seeing?" Ethan hesitated. Something about it. A feeling in the back of his skull. Something about the way Cross kept glancing at his watch. Something about the numbers being a little too clean. Like a room that's been staged. But the numbers looked right. And the clock was ticking. 22 days left. So he leaned toward Yes, and Leonard Ashford, who had been sitting in the corner the whole time, quietly reviewing the paperwork, with that stillness that was not passive, was not disengaged, was the stillness of a man paying attention to everything, including the things that weren't on the page. Ashford stood up. No. The room went still. Cross turned, the easy smile still on, but a flicker behind it. "I'm sorry, this deal." Ashford held up the document. His calm voice had gone very flat. Not angry, flat, which was worse. These bonds, where did they come from? "Distressed seller," Cross said smoothly. "Motivated." "Won't last. Who is the seller?" A pause. Just a beat too long. "A holding company," Cross said. "Nothing unusual. Shell structure. Everyone uses." Ashford set the document down, tapped one line buried deep in the paperwork. "This shell," Ashford said quietly, "traces back to an entity I recognize, established 4 years ago, by Marcus Blackwell." The room stopped breathing. "These aren't distressed bonds for sale," Ashford said. "These are bonds Marcus moved into a shell himself. He's planting them. If Ethan buys these, he's not gaining leverage. He's handing Marcus a tracing line straight back to the mystery buyer. He's exposing himself with his own money." Ethan's stomach went through the floor. He turned to Cross. Slowly. "You were going to walk me into that," Ethan said. His voice came out quiet. Too quiet. Past calm. On the other side of it. Cross's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. "I don't know what he's talking about," Cross said. "Shell companies cross-connect all the time. It's the nature of—" "Stop." Ethan stood up, and his hands were shaking. Not with fear, with something else. Something that scared him more than fear, because Ethan knew this feeling. He'd felt it in the foster homes, in the hallways and the parking lots and the rooms where adults said one thing and did another. He was angry, past angry. He was the kind of angry that doesn't think, the kind that moves, the kind the system had written about in his file. behavioral issues, impulse control concerns, history of physical altercation, age 12. Ethan Carver threw a chair at a wall in his third foster home because the foster father ate all the food and told the kids there was nothing left and laughed about it. They'd written it down, put it in the file, used words like aggressive, unstable. They never wrote down why. And now, standing in the mountain study, looking at the man who'd smiled at him and called him kid and tried to feed him to the wolf, Ethan's right hand closed into a fist. His arm started to rise, and he felt it. The old thing, the rage that lives in the body when the body has been lied to too many times. The rage that doesn't care about consequences, that just wants to make the liar feel what the lie felt like. His fist was up, his arm was back, and then a sound. Small, behind him, a breath being held. Ethan turned his head. Milo was in the doorway. The boy had come downstairs, maybe heard the voices, maybe heard the silence between them, which is always louder. And he was standing there, in the oversized t-shirt he slept in, messy hair, bare feet, not looking at Julian Cross, not looking at the documents, looking at the fist, and the expression on the boy's face went through Ethan like a blade made of ice. Fear, not fear of Cross, not fear of the situation, fear of Ethan, fear of the raised fist, fear of the thing every child in the system learned to fear before they learned anything else, an adult losing control. Milo had seen that before, in other homes, with other adults. He'd seen the fist go up, and he'd learned in his bones what comes after. And now he was seeing it in Ethan. Ethan dropped his hand, like it was burning. He dropped it and stepped back from Julian Cross. 1 step, 2, until there was air between them, until the distance was enough. He looked at his own hand, opened the fist, looked at the fingers like they belonged to someone else, someone he didn't want to be. "Get out," Ethan said to Cross, flat, drained. Cross opened his mouth. "Get out." Cross got out. The front door closed. The expensive car crunched away down the snow, and the silence came back. Ethan sat down on the floor, back against the wall. Milo sat down next to him. Close, not touching, just close, the way a small, warm thing sits next to a larger cold thing, not trying to fix it, just being there, being proof that the world is still the world, and the floor is still the floor, and you didn't do the bad thing. You wanted to, but you didn't. And Ethan understood that Milo had just saved him, not from Julian Cross, from himself, from the version the system had predicted, had expected, had written into a file and put on a shelf and waited for. They sat there for a long time, until the heater kicked on and the room got warm and the silence became the other kind, the kind between people who understand each other without words. The next morning, Ethan got back to work because the clock didn't care about his feelings. 22 days became 21, 21 became 20, and Marcus Blackwell, who did not know Ethan's name or face, had begun to notice something. Someone was moving on his debt, buying pieces of Blackwell Holdings quietly in the dark. Marcus couldn't see who, but he could feel it, the way you feel the first tremor in the floor before the earthquake hits. So Marcus started swinging, a transaction Ethan tried to make, declined, then another. A bank that had processed the last buy without blinking suddenly couldn't. Sent back a polite note about a review of the account. Then another bank, then a third. "He's noticed," Ashford said grimly. "Not who you are, but that someone is moving. He's felt the pressure and he's swinging at the dark." By midday, it was worse. A legal complaint had been filed, public, splashy, accusing an unnamed investor of attempting to manipulate the debt structure of Blackwell Holdings. No name yet. Marcus didn't have the name, but he had lawyers, and lawyers with enough money behind them will chase a cent until they find it or die trying. The doors were closing, one by one. Ethan sat in the study late, the letter spread on the desk, reading his grandfather's words again. Ashford came in near midnight, set 2 glasses on the desk, poured from a bottle on the shelf. Whiskey. Ethan looked at the glass, didn't touch it. He was 18. Ashford knew that. The glass was a gesture, not an offer, a way of saying, I'm sitting with you in this. It's slipping, Ethan said. Every door he closes, I've got fewer ways through. And the clock. He shook his head. 19 days. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe he set it up so it was never possible. Ashford was quiet for a long moment. Your grandfather didn't choose you because this would be easy, Ashford said. Ethan looked up. He chose you because of what you don't have. Every door Marcus is closing. He's closing it the way you close a door on arrival. Someone with a reputation to protect, assets to freeze, a name to ruin. A pause. You don't have any of that. You're a ghost. You came out of a foster home 4 days ago with a backpack and $1. There is nothing for him to freeze, nothing for him to ruin. He's swinging at someone who isn't there. Ethan stared at him. Stop fighting him in the daylight, Ashford said. That's his country. The banks, the courts, the public complaints. That's where he's king. The old lawyer leaned forward. Go where he can't follow. Go quiet. Go small. Buy the debt through a dozen tiny vehicles. None of them connected. None of them loud. Let him swing at shadows in the light. While in the dark. Piece by piece, you take the floor out from under him. Something opened in Ethan's chest. He didn't call it hope. He'd been burned too many times for that word. Something adjacent to hope. Hope's cautious neighbor. Quiet, Ethan said. Quiet. Ashford agreed. But they couldn't do it alone. Not through paperwork and screens. The sellers Ethan needed to reach. The small holders of Blackwell debt scattered across the region. Many of them were people. Real people who had done business with Marcus Blackwell and been promised something and given something else. People who'd been thrown away. You need to go to them, Ashford said. Not as a buyer, as a listener. So Ethan did something no 18-year-old should ever have to do. He put on the one good shirt Ashford had bought him, and he went to meet the wreckage. First was a woman named Helen Pace, 58 years old, ran a construction company for 30 years, built half the school additions in King County, calloused hands, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who looked at you once and decided in 2 seconds whether you were worth her time. Marcus had hired her firm for a waterfront development, $32 million contract. She'd put everything into it. Equipment, labor, her personal savings as collateral. Her crew broke ground, built the foundations, poured concrete. 6 months of work. Then Marcus pulled the funding, cited market conditions, walked away, left Helen holding the costs. She lost the company. When Ethan walked into her kitchen, she looked at him and laughed. They sent a child. Ethan didn't flinch. I know how this looks, he said. You don't know the half of it, kid. You look like you should be applying for college, not buying corporate debt. Ethan sat down at her kitchen table, solid wood, built by hand, and he told her enough. That Marcus had stolen from the company, that there was proof, that the debt she was holding was worth something if she was willing to let Ethan use it at the right moment. Why should I trust you? Helen said. You shouldn't, Ethan said. You don't know me. I'm nobody. She looked at him for a long time. That's the first honest thing anyone from that company has ever said to me. She sold him the debt. And then she picked up her phone and called 3 other contractors Marcus had stiffed. There's a kid here. You should talk to him. Second was a man named Warren Kessler, 62, former partner in a joint venture Marcus had structured so that when it succeeded, Marcus kept the profits, and when it failed, Warren kept the losses. Warren had put his retirement into that venture. All of it. His wife's too. They'd had to sell the house. Warren didn't trust Ethan either. Not at first. Then Ethan said something that changed it. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust that Marcus Blackwell has done this to enough people that eventually one of them was going to show up at his door and hand him the bill." Warren looked at his wife. His wife looked at Warren. Something passed between them. The thing that passes between people who have shared a loss and survived it. Warren handed over his documents and 2 more phone numbers. That's how it went. Person by person. Kitchen table by kitchen table. Not in boardrooms, not in glass towers, in the places where real people lived with the consequences of what Marcus Blackwell had done. Ethan built his coalition 1 stone at a time. The people Marcus threw away finding each other through an 18-year-old kid who understood what it felt like to be discarded. Because he'd been discarded his whole life. And that knowledge was not a weakness. It was the thing that made every person in every kitchen trust him. Because he wasn't performing empathy. He had it, in his bones, baked in by 18 years of cold. He didn't promise them money. He didn't promise revenge. He promised them something simpler. The truth. In a room where someone believed it. 18 days left. Ethan was in the study. Late. Going through the documents from the safe for the 7th time, looking for something he might have missed. And then he found it. A file. Thin. Tucked between 2 thicker folders. Like it had been placed there by a man who wanted it found, but only by someone looking hard enough. Inside. A police report. Dated 15 years ago. The death of James Blackwell, Ethan's father. The official cause. Single car accident on a mountain road. Late at night. Wet conditions. Vehicle left the road. Driver killed on impact. Ruled accidental. Case closed. But clipped to the police report. In his grandfather's handwriting were notes, dates, phone records, a timeline. James Blackwell, 2 days before his death, had contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission. He had evidence of financial fraud inside Blackwell Holdings, fraud committed by his brother. James had arranged a meeting with a federal investigator. The meeting was scheduled for the morning after the accident. The morning after. Ethan stared at the timeline, read it again, until the words blurred and reformed. His father hadn't driven off a road in the rain. His father had been about to bring Marcus down, had been carrying the evidence that would end everything. And the night before he could deliver it. The night before. Ethan's hands were shaking, but not with anger this time, with something deeper, colder. He sat very still, and then Leonard Ashford walked in, and Ethan held up the file, and he saw immediately that Ashford already knew, had always known. "You knew," Ethan said. Ashford stood in the doorway, and something happened to his face, a fracture in the wall that had held everything in place for 31 years. "Sit down," Ethan said, and his voice was gentle, which surprised them both. Ashford sat, and he told it. Not like a lawyer, like a man, an old man carrying something too heavy for too long. "James was my closest friend," Ashford said, "since college, before any of this, before the company, before the money. We were just 2 young men who liked the same books and disagreed about everything else." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "The night before, James called me, 2 in the morning. He said, 'Leonard, I have everything, every account, every transfer, every shell company. Tomorrow morning I'm handing it over. It ends tomorrow.'" Ashford stopped, looked at his hands. I said, "Wait." The word cracked, like glass that hasn't broken yet but will. I said, "Wait. Let me find a safe way. Don't go to them alone. Give me 1 more day." A breath. Ragged. He gave me the day, and the day killed him. Silence, The kind that lives in a room after someone has said the thing they've been carrying for years. "You didn't kill him," Ethan said. Ashford looked at him, the old eyes wet. For the first time in all the days Ethan had known him. "I told him to wait." "You told him to be careful," Ethan said. "That's not the same thing. Marcus killed him. Not the word wait. Not you. And Ethan, 18 years old, who had never had a father." Reached across the desk and put his hand on the old lawyer's shoulder and held it there. The way you hold something that is falling. Not to stop the fall, just to let it know it's not falling alone. Two men. In a room full of a dead man's books, both of them carrying ghosts, both of them in that moment setting something down. 11 days left, and Marcus Blackwell found Milo. Ethan would never know exactly how. A school record, maybe. A trail through the provisional guardianship paperwork. Marcus had lawyers and enough money behind them to trace a shadow to its source. But Marcus didn't do what Ethan braced for. No threat. No black car outside the school. No man in a suit grabbing Milo by the arm. Ethan had been ready for that kind of danger. The loud kind. The kind you can see coming and put your body in front of. This was worse. What arrived on a quiet Tuesday, delivered by courier, was a folder. Legal. Official. Stamped. Inside. A petition. Marcus Blackwell and his wife Catherine Blackwell filing for guardianship of a 10-year-old minor named Milo. Ethan read it 3 times. "I don't." He looked at Ashford, face white, page shaking. "I don't understand. He wants Milo." "Why? He doesn't even know Milo." And then he understood. All at once. "It's a weapon," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "He found the one thing I'd actually fight for, and he's not threatening it. He's offering it a better home." Ashford took the folder. "Read it. Jaw tight. He can't find the ghost moving on his debt. But he found the boy the ghost loves, and he doesn't have to do anything illegal. He just has to be better." "A wealthy married couple," Ashford went on. "Stable home, mansions, best schools, versus an 18-year-old with a provisional arrangement, permanent hearing in weeks, living in a borrowed house, hasn't slept in 3 weeks, in front of a family court judge. Marcus looks like a gift, like the answer to a prayer, and I look like a kid who can't take care of him." The words fell out of Ethan like stones. He sat down slowly, and he saw the trap. Complete. Perfect. He could keep fighting for the company, win his father's memory, win his grandfather's last wish, or he could fight for the boy. But not both. Not in 11 days. There wasn't enough of him. Every hour in family court was an hour not spent on the company. Every hour on the company was an hour Marcus's lawyer spent making Ethan look like exactly what the system had always said he was. Choose. The trap said. The company or the boy. And Ethan knew which one his grandfather would tell him to choose. The letter was right there. Make it right. 30 days. The company. But it wasn't a contest. Not for 1 second. Because Ethan looked down the hall, toward the room where Milo was sleeping behind a window full of snow. And there was no version of this. No universe. No calculation in any notebook. Where he handed that boy to the man who destroyed his own brother. He'd burn it all down first. "He thinks I'll choose the money," Ethan said quietly. "Marcus, he thinks I'm him. He thinks anyone faced with $50 million on one side and a foster kid on the other picks the money." Ashford said nothing. "He doesn't understand. He's never understood. That's his whole problem. He thinks everyone has a price. He thinks Milo is a price." 3 a.m, 4 days before the hearing. Ethan sat alone in the study, in the dark, his phone in his hand. On the screen, the number for Marcus's lawyer. Because the thought had crept in, quiet and reasonable, the way the worst thoughts always do. Maybe you're being selfish. Maybe keeping him is about what you need, not what he needs. Maybe the loving thing is to let him go somewhere with more. More rooms, more money, more future. He sat with that thought for a long time, thumb hovering over the call button, and then he thought about the letter. I told myself it was protection. Perhaps it was only cowardice wearing protection's clothes. Henry Blackwell had let Ethan go. For good reasons. The best reasons. And Ethan had spent 18 years in the cold, believing he was nobody's, because a man who loved him had decided that giving him up was the loving thing. No. Ethan lowered the phone. He would not make that mistake. He would not let Milo grow up the way he had. Told in 100 quiet ways that he was a problem to be placed instead of a person to be kept. Milo didn't need a bigger house. Milo needed to know all the way down to the bone that someone had chosen him and would never unchoose him. That was the thing money couldn't buy, and it was the only thing Ethan had ever had to give. He set the phone on the desk face down. Done. And then, footsteps. Small, bare feet on cold floor. Milo appeared in the doorway, in his oversized t-shirt, half asleep, hair vertical, holding a plate. On the plate, 2 pieces of toast, badly made. One piece burned nearly black, the other only slightly less burned. The butter applied in a single, thick slab like a pat of butter had been placed on the bread and told to figure it out. The boy set the plate on the desk, next to the phone, and pushed the bigger piece, the less burned piece, toward Ethan. Didn't say anything, just pushed the plate, because he'd seen Ethan do it 100 times. The big half pushed across the table without words. Here, this is yours, because you matter more to me than the thing I'm giving up. Milo had learned it, not from a lesson, not from a speech, from watching. And now he was doing it back, the only way he knew how, with burned toast and too much butter and bare feet on a cold floor at 3 in the morning. Ethan looked at the toast, then at the boy, then at the toast. He picked it up, ate it, every bite, including the burned part, which tasted like carbon and butter and something he couldn't name, and was the best thing he had ever eaten in his life. "Go to bed," Ethan said, voice rough. "You too," Milo said. "Soon. Promise." "Promise." Milo padded back down the hall, and Ethan sat in the dark with the taste of burned toast in his mouth and the phone face down on the desk. And somewhere in the dark he found it again. Not hope. Something harder than hope. Something that didn't need permission. That didn't care how many doors were closed, because it would go through the wall if it had to. Resolve. And then, 1 hour later, the phone rang. A number he didn't know. He almost didn't answer. Phone calls at 4 in the morning are never good news, but something made him pick up. Carver. The voice on the other end. Quiet, strained, stripped of everything Ethan associated with it. No charm, no confidence. Julian Cross. Ethan sat up. "You've got a lot of nerve. Just listen. Please." And the please stopped him, because Julian Cross did not say please. Julian Cross said, "Let me handle it, and trust me on this, and welcome to the table, kid." Not please. This voice was none of those things. This was a man who had been walking in circles in the dark, and finally stood still. "I know what he's doing with the kid. I know about the petition." "How?" "Because I still hear things from his side." A pause, a breath that shook. "I need to tell you something, and then I need to give you something, and after that you'll never hear from me again." Silence. "When I took his money," Cross said, "I told myself it was just business. That's what we all say. Loyalty's rented. I've walked people into bad rooms my whole career. Smiled while I did it. Never lost sleep." "Then why are you calling me at 4 in the morning?" A long silence. "Because I have a daughter," Cross said. She's grown now, but I wasn't there when she was small. Long story, bad story. She spent years in the system, group homes, the whole thing, while I was off doing just business, a breath. When I heard what Marcus was doing, going after your kid, using a foster kid as a chip in a poker game. Something tore in his voice. Something in me just stopped. I've done a lot of things. I can look in the mirror after most of them. Not proud, but I can look. I can't look after this one. Ethan was very still. He keeps everything, Cross said. Marcus, every dirty thing, accounts, transfers, shell companies, everything he's pulled out of Blackwell Holdings for years, hidden offshore. He thinks the writing protects him. I had access while I worked for him. I kept copies. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm about to send you everything. The accounts, the transfers, the offshore structure. Proof that Marcus Blackwell has been stealing from his own company for years. A breath. Steadier now. It won't help you buy the debt faster. That part you still have to do yourself, but Carver, when the moment comes, when you finally stand in front of that man and everyone who ever laughed at you, this is what ends him. Not the leverage. This, the truth. Silence. The man who had tried to feed him to the wolf, calling at 4 a.m. to hand him the knife instead. Why? Ethan said. Why give it to me? You could sell it. Because you didn't yell at me, Cross said quietly. Ethan opened his eyes. That day in the study, when you caught me. I've been caught before, Carver. People scream. They threaten. They tell you what kind of garbage you are. And they're usually right. A pause. You just looked at me and said, "Get out." Quiet. Like you were disappointed. Like you'd expected better of me. A long breath. Nobody's expected better of me in a long time. Silence. So consider it my resignation from the just business life. The line went dead. Ethan sat in the dark, phone still pressed to his ear, and then his phone buzzed. A file arriving. He opened it, scrolled. Account numbers, wire transfers, dates, amounts, shell companies linked like vertebrae in a spine, all tracing back to one name, Marcus Blackwell. Years of it. Millions of it. Money pulled out of the company Henry Blackwell built with his own hands. Money that should have gone to the workers and the projects and the city. Siphoned into the dark. Ethan stared at it. He still didn't have a clear path through the trap. 11 days. The boy still on the table. The doors still closing. But for the first time in days, he wasn't looking at a wall. He was looking at a weapon. He set the phone down, pressed his hand flat against his jacket pocket, where the dollar bill still sat over his heart. 11 days. Down in the city. Marcus Blackwell slept soundly, certain he'd already won, certain everyone in the end had a price. He had no idea the ghost had a name now. He had no idea the name had a face. And the face had a backpack and a dead father's memory, and a mountain house full of his own brother's secrets. He had no idea that a man he'd bought and discarded had just handed that face the one thing that could burn it all down. Down the hall behind a window full of snow. Milo slept, warm, in the room he'd chosen, and Ethan sat up the rest of the night, reading, planning, building the thing in the dark piece by piece. Patient, invisible, like water finding every crack in a wall, because the clock was running, and he had a company to take back, a boy to keep, a father to answer for, and $1 to return to the man who'd thought it was an insult. 9 days to go. The family court was nothing like the glass tower. No marble, no floor-to-ceiling views. Just a tired municipal building. Fluorescent lights that hummed a note slightly off-key. Scuffed linoleum the color of every government waiting room Ethan Carver had ever sat in. and he had sat in a lot of them. Enough to know the exact shade, somewhere between beige and giving up. People waited on hard benches with their whole lives in manila folders. A woman across the hall pressing her hands together. A man in a wrinkled jacket bouncing his knee so fast the bench vibrated. A couple in the corner whispering. Sharp, urgent whispers that weren't really whispers at all. Ethan knew this building. Not this specific one, but this kind. The kind with water-stained ceiling tiles. The kind where the vending machine takes your dollar and gives you nothing and nobody fixes it. Because the people who use this building don't have the kind of voice that gets things fixed. He sat very straight. He wore the suit Leonard Ashford had bought him. Dark, simple. It fit him in a way no piece of clothing ever had. Ashford had insisted. You are not walking into that courtroom in a jacket held together with a safety pin. That is not happening. And Ethan had seen something in the old lawyer's face that wasn't about the suit at all. Something that said your father would have looked like this. And I need to see it. Just once. His hands were on his knees, flat, still, steady as stone. Across the aisle sat Marcus Blackwell and his wife Catherine. Marcus had the posture of a man who'd been sitting at the head of tables his entire life and had forgotten other positions existed. He radiated the specific confidence of someone who had never once walked into a room and wondered whether the room wanted him there. Catherine Blackwell sat beside him, 63 years old, silver hair pulled back, a string of pearls at her throat, composed, arranged, every detail in its correct place. She had spent decades learning exactly how to hold her hands in public, how to arrange her face into the appropriate expression for every occasion. Right now, she was wearing the expression for concerned. We care deeply about this child. We are good people doing a good thing. But Ethan noticed something Marcus didn't, because Marcus never really looked at his wife. Not the way you look at a person to understand what they're feeling. He looked at Catherine the way he looked at everything, as a piece, in position. Ethan noticed that Catherine's hands were folded in her lap too tight, the knuckles pale. He noticed she did not smile. He noticed that every time her eyes drifted toward Milo, they pulled away again fast, like a hand yanked from something hot. Ethan filed that away. Milo sat in his chair, small, in the nice clothes Ethan had bought him, his messy hair combed flat for once. It had taken 14 minutes. The hair had fought valiantly, but lost most of the major battles. One piece in the back still stood straight up, defiant, a tiny flag from a losing army that refused to acknowledge the loss. The boy's eyes moved, reading the room the way he always did, finding exits, counting strangers, the way a small animal does in an unfamiliar cage, not panicking, recording, preparing. And Ethan wanted more than anything he had ever wanted to lean over and whisper, "I've got you. I'm here." But he couldn't. Not yet. Not in this room where everything he did was being weighed by a person he'd never met, who was about to decide whether he got to keep the only thing in the world that mattered. So he caught Milo's eye and gave him the nod. Small, almost invisible. "I'm here." Milo nodded back. Quick, and something in his shoulders released. A fraction of an inch. The hearing began. Marcus's lawyer went first, and he was very good. Not honest good, the other kind. The kind that costs $1,500 an hour and sounds like a symphony, composed to make you forget you're being played. He painted a picture, and it was a beautiful picture. A loving, established couple, a magnificent home, private schools, travel, medical coverage, dental coverage, the kind of stability that comes from real money. He laid it out like a feast, course after course, and the judge listened. An older woman, tired eyes behind reading glasses, careful eyes. She took notes, and her face gave nothing away. Then the lawyer turned to Ethan, and he did not have to be cruel. That was the part that hurt the most, not cruelty. Cruelty you can fight. This was gentleness wielded as a weapon. 18 years old, the lawyer said. Softly, regretfully. Aged out of the foster care system mere weeks ago. No established career. No higher education. A provisional guardianship arrangement less than a year old. No permanent home. Currently residing. And here his voice acquired a delicate emphasis. In a property he does not own. A young man clearly of good heart. The pause. The but. Hanging in the air like a blade held up by a thread. But is good heart enough? When weighed against everything the Blackwells can provide. We simply ask the court to consider what is best for the child's future, not the adult's feelings. And he sat down, and it landed exactly the way it was meant to. Ethan felt the room tilt toward Marcus, felt the judge's eyes moving between the two sides, between the mansions and the laundromat, between the pearls and the sneakers with the peeling sole he'd hidden under the table. Felt the old verdict rising, the one the world had been handing him since he was old enough to understand it. Not good enough. Never good enough. Ethan's lawyer stood. Sarah Langford. Kind and sharp and honest. She made her case well. Stability isn't only measured in square footage or account balances. It's measured in consistency, in devotion, in what a child feels when he wakes up in the morning and the first thing he sees is the face of the person who chose him. This is a boy who was moved 7 times in 2 years, 7 homes, 7 sets of strangers, 7 times being told this isn't working. Pack the bag. She paused, and now for the first time he has stopped flinching. She was good, but Ethan could see it wasn't enough. Because on the paper the judge was looking at, the paper with facts and figures and income levels. On that paper, Marcus won. On that paper, money won. And then the judge did something unusual. She put her pen down, not set it down, put it down. The way you put something down when the tool has stopped being useful. When you need something, the pen can't write. She looked at Milo, for a long moment, not at his file, at him, and something in her face softened. The judge underneath the robe remembering she was also a person. "I'd like to hear from the child," she said. "If he's willing." The room went still. "Milo, would you come up here and talk to me for a minute?" Ethan's heart stopped, because this was not in any plan. This was a judge exercising the one power no lawyer can predict, the power to ask a child what a child thinks. And Ethan was terrified, because nobody could script a 10-year-old, because Milo had spent 2 years learning to give adults the safe answer, the one that didn't get you moved. The truth was dangerous. The truth got you packed into another garbage bag. What would the boy say? Milo slid out of the chair, walked to the bench, small and stiff, that one piece of hair still standing up in the back like a periscope checking for danger. The judge came down off her high seat, knelt to his level, eye to eye. "Hi, Milo," she said gently. "You're not in trouble. I just want to ask you something. And there's no wrong answer. You tell me the truth." Milo nodded. Once. His eyes found Ethan across the room and locked on. "These nice people," the judge said, gesturing toward Marcus and Catherine. "They have a big house, lots of nice things. And Ethan, well, Ethan's pretty young himself, doesn't have as much." She paused. "If you could pick Milo, where would you want to live?" Silence. Long silence. The kind that fills a room the way water fills a glass, rising until it reaches the rim, long enough that Marcus shifted, long enough that Sarah Langford's pen stopped moving, long enough that Ethan forgot he had lungs. And then Milo didn't talk about houses. He didn't talk about money or schools or pools, or any of the things the adults had spent the morning arguing about. He looked at the judge, and in a small, clear voice that shook but did not break, he said, "Ethan gives me the big half." The judge blinked. "I'm sorry, the big half," Milo said. "Of the bread. When there's not enough, he tears it in half and he gives me the bigger piece. Every time." He looked down at his hands, then back up, and he says he already ate. But I know he didn't. Because I checked once. I woke up early and I watched. And he didn't eat. He just drank water and stood at the sink. And then when I came out, he said good morning and gave me the big half and said he was full. The boy's voice wobbled, but he kept going. Nobody ever did that before. Everybody before. They kept the big half. That's just what grown-ups do. That's what I thought. Grown-ups keep the good stuff. Kids get what's left. That's how it works. He looked at Ethan, and his eyes were wet. But he wasn't crying. He was doing that thing children do when they've decided this moment is too important for tears. But Ethan gives me the big half, even when he's hungry, even when I hear his stomach make that sound and he pretends it didn't. A breath, small and shaky. So I want to live where Ethan is. I don't care about the house. I don't care if it's small. I don't care if it smells like dryer sheets and the ceiling has a stain on it. I just want to live where somebody gives me the big half. The courtroom was silent. Not polite silence, heavy silence. The kind that happens when a room full of adults realizes a 10-year-old just said the truest thing any of them have heard in years. And Ethan Carver, who had not cried at the reading of the will, who had not cried when he learned his father had been destroyed, who had not cried reading a dead grandfather's apology, who had not cried when he discovered his father had been killed, who had not cried when Leonard Ashford broke down over a phone call 15 years too late, felt something break open, something sealed shut for 18 years, cracked right there under fluorescent lights on scuffed linoleum. And what came through was warm, and it hurt, and it was the best hurt he'd ever felt. He pressed his hand against his mouth to keep the sound in. Because you don't cry in court. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. But the rule had never accounted for a boy who noticed the bread. The judge knelt there a moment longer, and when she stood, her tired eyes were not so careful anymore. Something had moved behind them, rearranged itself. But before the judge could speak, "Your Honor," a voice from the other side of the aisle. Quiet, unsteady. Everyone turned. Catherine Blackwell was on her feet. Marcus's head snapped toward her. "Catherine," low, a warning. "Sit down." She didn't sit down. "Your Honor," Catherine said again, and her voice cracked. The composure, the decades of practice, cracking, the pearls trembling at her throat. "I need to say something. I should have said it before we walked in here. I should have said it years ago." "Catherine." Marcus's voice was thin now. "We discussed. We never discussed a child." She turned to him, and everything came up all at once, like something that had been building underground for years, finally finding the crack. "You told me it was about the company," she said. "You told me it was leverage. You said we'd file the petition, and his guardian would panic and give up whatever financial fight he was running, and then we'd withdraw quietly and nobody would know." Her hands unclenched. For the first time. "You never told me I'd have to sit in a room and look at him. You never told me he'd be real. You never told me he'd have messy hair and scared eyes and be 10 years old. You never told me he'd talk about bread." She was shaking. Not with anger. With the specific tremor that happens when a person is dismantling their own life in public and knows it and does it anyway. Because the alternative of keeping quiet one more day has become worse than the dismantling. "We were never going to keep him," Catherine said to the judge, the words pouring now. "That's the truth. God forgive me. This was never about loving that child. This was about money, control, making someone give up by threatening the one thing he loves most." She stopped, tried to breathe. "We were going to use a little boy as a—" She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. She turned to Ethan, and her face was wrecked. The mask she'd been wearing for decades. The mask that looked like pearls and crossed ankles, on the floor in pieces. And what was underneath was just a woman, 63 years old, who had spent her whole life choosing comfort over courage, and was now in a tired courtroom choosing courage. Too late. She knew that. You could see the knowing in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what's wrong with this family that we keep learning to treat people like pieces on a board. But I won't do it anymore. Not with a child. Not anymore." And she sat down, and she wept. Not the elegant kind, the ugly kind, the real kind, the kind that comes when something has been held in so long, the release is violent. Marcus Blackwell sat beside his weeping wife, and for the first time in his life looked like a man who had run out of moves. The judge took a long breath. "I think I've heard everything I need. Provisional guardianship upheld. Petition denied. Noted for the record with grave concern regarding the petitioner's stated motives. A formal recommendation entered for the permanent hearing that the current arrangement be viewed most favorably." The gavel. Small sound, heavy sound, and Milo ran across the courtroom, past the lawyers and the benches. He ran the way kids run when they've been sitting still too long. Fast, graceless, that one piece of hair bouncing. And Ethan caught him, lifted him clean off the scuffed floor, held on the way you hold something after the universe tried to take it, and you said no with your whole body, with your whole life. The boy buried his face in Ethan's shoulder, and Ethan held the back of his head with one hand, cupping it, gentle. "I've got you," Ethan whispered into the messy hair. "You hear me. I've got you. The big half is yours. Always." And the boy held on, and did not let go. That was the first war. The second one ended 2 days later, because while Marcus Blackwell had been in family court watching his wife dismantle their marriage over a story about bread, the 30-day clock had been ticking, and Ethan had spent every remaining hour doing the last of the quiet work, the water-finding cracks. The coalition had finished its job, Helen Pace and her contractors, Warren Kessler with his documents, the fired manager with her receipts. One by one, the thrown-away people of Marcus Blackwell's career had handed their pieces to an 18-year-old kid who put them together, one stone at a time. And now, the last day, the final hours, Marcus Blackwell was throwing a party, because of course he was. The annual Blackwell Holdings Charity Gala. Grand Ballroom, 39th floor of the tower downtown. Crystal chandeliers. Live music. Catered seafood. Champagne that cost more per glass than Ethan used to earn in a shift. And reporters. Always reporters. Because what is power if nobody photographs it? Marcus stood in the center. Glass of scotch. Silver hair catching the chandelier light, the generous face of the family empire, smiling for cameras, accepting congratulations. He did not know that the floor was already gone, because through a dozen quiet vehicles and a coalition of discarded people, more than half of Blackwell Holdings' most vulnerable debt had quietly changed hands. It belonged now to a single private trust, Ethan's trust. And tonight, the ghost was done hiding. The ballroom doors opened, not with drama, just a door opening. One moment closed, the next, not. But conversations faded, like candles in a breeze, and the fading spread outward as heads turned. A young man had walked in, dark suit, hair neat, posture straight, and on his face something that made people look twice. Not confidence. Everyone else in this room was performing confidence. This was calm, real calm, the kind that comes from having already lost everything and survived it, and decided what to do next. Ethan Carver walked into the ballroom, and behind him, through other doors, one at a time, came the others. Helen Pace in a blazer she hadn't worn in 3 years, Warren Kessler in a tie his wife had straightened in the car, the fired manager, a journalist who'd been sitting on a story for months, a board member who'd been asking questions nobody wanted to answer, the contractors, The partners. They came separately, spread through the crowd, holding champagne, looking like they belonged, because tonight they did. Marcus spotted Ethan, and the scotch glass paused halfway to his mouth, and the smile stayed on, but something flickered behind it. Ethan reached the long table where board members stood, set down a leather folder, opened it. "I believe," he said, and his voice carried because the room had gone quiet enough to carry it. "Several of you will want to see this. Inside the debt agreements, millions in loans transferred to a single trust." Marcus crossed the room fast, smile on full wattage. "What is this? Some kind of stunt?" He looked at Ethan. Performed amusement. "I'm sorry, do we even know this young man?" And Ethan looked at him. The man who laughed across a marble table 30 days ago. The man who used a child as a bargaining chip. The man who destroyed his own brother. "No," Ethan said, quietly. "Buying a few scraps of paper doesn't make me anybody." Pause. "But holding the majority of a company's debt makes me its largest creditor. And that makes me somebody you have to listen to." Leonard Ashford stepped forward, his calm old voice cutting through the room. "Under the company's debt covenants and restructuring provisions, a creditor holding this level of obligation has standing to demand an emergency review of executive leadership, tonight if necessary." Marcus's face curdled, but Ethan wasn't done. He reached into the folder and laid out the second set of documents. Bank records, wire transfers, shell companies, Julian Cross's gift, the receipts of a man who had stolen from his own company for years. "These," Ethan said, and his voice was not quite calm now because some truths have edges, "are records of money taken from Blackwell Holdings, quietly for years, diverted into shell companies, hidden offshore, money that belonged to this company, to its employees, to the city it was supposed to serve." He looked around the table. "Money my uncle stole from the company his own father built." Silence, the kind that presses on your ears. Phones came out, cameras. Reporters who had come for a puff piece understood all at once that they were standing in the middle of something else entirely. And then Ethan reached into his jacket, the inside pocket over his heart, and took out the dollar bill, the same dollar, old, creased, carried for 30 days against his chest. Through mountain studies and midnight lessons and courtrooms and burned toast and sleepless nights and a child's voice saying the big half, he unfolded it carefully. And there, in the last fold, pressed flat, invisible unless you knew, a memory card, smaller than a thumbnail. Henry Blackwell had spent the last years of his life collecting evidence. Every stolen dollar, every hidden account, everything Marcus had done in the dark, and hidden it inside the thing nobody would ever think to look at. The inheritance so small it was a joke. $1, worthless, beneath notice, dismissed without a second glance, except it was the weapon, the whole time. The weapon was the joke, and the joke was on every person who'd laughed at it. Ethan held up the chip. "My grandfather couldn't remove Marcus without destroying the company. So he did something else. He saved the truth, every piece of it, and put it inside the one thing Marcus would never take seriously." He looked at Marcus. "You laughed at this dollar. You forgot it existed before I left the room. You forgot I existed before I left the room." A breath. "That was your mistake." Marcus stared at the chip, at the dollar, at the reporters, at the board members reading the documents, at the faces in the crowd he suddenly recognized, the people he'd discarded, standing in his ballroom, holding his champagne, watching him lose. "Who are you?" Marcus said. The words thin and hollow. Ethan looked at him. "James Blackwell was my father." And he watched the name land, watched the color drain, watched the understanding arrive terrible and complete. "You destroyed him," Ethan said quietly. You took his name, his standing, his life, and you never thought about him again. A breath. There was me. The emergency board meeting convened Monday morning. Gray faces, legal pads, federal investigators on the phone. The vote, one hand at a time going up around the table. Marcus Blackwell, removed, effective immediately. Marcus stood, chair crashing back. You think this makes you better than me? You're nobody. A foster home nobody who got lucky. Ethan let him finish, let the words hit the walls and fall. Then he stood, reached into his pocket, took out the dollar bill. Just paper now, no chip. Just an old wrinkled bill that had traveled a long way. He set it on the table in front of Marcus, gently. My inheritance, Ethan said. Don't spend it all in one place. And he turned and walked out, the same way he'd walked out of that first room 30 days ago. Steady, unhurried, head up. Except this time the silence behind him wasn't laughter. 6 months later, the world looked different, not fixed, different, which is maybe all you can ask. Blackwell Holdings had new leadership, a board Ethan helped choose, professionals who remembered that a company is supposed to serve something larger than the people running it. Ethan had stepped back, deliberately, completely, because he'd meant what he said. I didn't come to take it. I came to give it back. But he did one thing before he stepped away, written into the restructuring agreement. Permanent, irrevocable. A percentage of company profits every year directed to programs for children in the foster care system. Not a donation, a policy, built into the bones of the company, so that long after everyone forgot Ethan's name, the money would keep flowing. To the kids on the benches, the kids in the garbage bags, the kids learning to read rooms and be invisible. Not charity. Structure. That was what his grandfather meant. Not just remove Marcus. Change the machine. Marcus was facing the courts, federal charges, the long, slow grind. Not revenge. Ethan had learned the difference. Revenge is wanting someone to suffer the way you did. Justice is making sure they can't do it to anyone else. Catherine Blackwell filed for divorce, sold the pearls. She didn't need them anymore. You don't need armor when you've stopped hiding. She volunteered now, 3 days a week at a children's home across the city, reading to kids, sitting with them, not performing concern, just being present. A woman of 63 who had spent her whole life silent, who had found her voice in a courtroom over a story about bread, and had decided the rest of her life would be lived out loud. She wrote to Ethan once, not asking forgiveness, just saying she thought about the boy and the bread more often than he might believe. Ethan wrote back 3 words. Thank you. Truly. Because people can change. He had to believe that, because if Catherine at 63 could tear her life apart in a courtroom and start over, then nobody was too old, nobody was too far gone, nobody had been quiet too long. That was maybe the most important thing. Julian Cross sent a photograph. No letter, just a picture. Him and a young woman in her 20s. Coffee, morning light. She had his chin, his eyes, and a smile he almost certainly did not deserve, but was trying every day to earn. Grace Holloway came on a Tuesday. She stood at the entrance of the James Blackwell Center in Tacoma, the building Ethan had opened 2 months ago, renovated from a crumbling community center into something warm and bright and full of the good kind of noise, basketballs and laughter and kids arguing over whose turn it is on the computer. Grace stood in the doorway, not coming in, not leaving, caught in the space between 15 years of distance and whatever came next. Ethan saw her from across the lobby. He walked over, as they stood there, looking at each other. The woman who'd watched him from arm's length for 15 years, and the boy she'd watched become a man. 15 years, Ethan said. The roof that never leaked. The shoes every September. The funding nobody could trace. He looked at her. That was you. Grace Holloway, who had forgotten his birthday, who had lectured him about his grades, who had looked at him with that flat, efficient expression. Grace, who had kept the roof over his head, who had kept him alive from arm's length without ever being allowed to say why. She didn't answer. But her eyes, those efficient, careful eyes, were not efficient anymore. 15 years full. Thank you, Ethan said, for staying. She put her hand over his and held it there, and that was enough, for both of them, for 15 years of silence. One hand over another in a warm doorway was enough. Leonard Ashford stood beside Ethan on the steps of the center, afternoon sun coming through the clouds the way it does in Seattle. Reluctantly. Then all at once, children played on the grass, kids from foster homes, kids who had been bounced and placed and packed into garbage bags and told this isn't working. Kids who for the first time had a place that was theirs. That didn't ask them to earn it. That just let them be in it. Milo was out there, chasing a golden retriever named Biscuit, a ridiculous goofy dog who loved every child equally, and the bread crusts they snuck him most of all. The dog had no idea about billion-dollar companies, or offshore accounts, or custody hearings. The dog knew 3 things: kids, crusts, running. And that was a complete philosophy. Milo was laughing, really laughing, the deep kind that doesn't look over its shoulder, the kind that comes from a kid who has finally stopped waiting for the floor to disappear. The permanent guardianship had gone through several weeks back. The process had taken longer than the original 2 months because the court wanted to let the dust settle after everything that had happened with Marcus. Same judge, same courtroom, same linoleum, but different. Because this time the judge barely looked at the file. She looked at Ethan. She looked at Milo. She looked at the thing between them that didn't have a legal definition but didn't need one. Family. Granted, permanent. Milo was Ethan's. For good. On paper now. The way it had been true everywhere else for a long time. Your father would be proud, Ashford said quietly. Ethan watched Milo tackle the dog into a pile of leaves, watched the other kids laughing, watched a place full of children who didn't have to worry about tomorrow, and he thought about it, whether his grandfather would be proud. The old man had asked him to take back a company, and he had, but that had never been the real inheritance, not the company, not the 50 million, not even the dollar. The inheritance was the choice, because Ethan could have kept it all, could have sat in the big chair, lived in the big house, become the kind of man who holds the big half for himself and calls it earned. The money offered that. Marcus practically dared him. You're just like me. Everyone has a price. And Ethan had looked at all of it. The power, the revenge, the chance to make Marcus feel what his father felt. And he set it down, gently, like a dollar bill on a conference table. Because the point was never taking everything from the man who took everything. The point was this: a warm building full of laughing kids, a boy with messy hair and a goofy dog and a future, a cycle broken, a cold thing made warm. I think he would, Ethan said, softly. Milo looked up from the leaves, spotted Ethan on the steps, and his whole face lit up, easy and bright, the face of a kid who knows where he belongs, a kid who has stopped checking for exits. Ethan, he yelled across the grass. Come on, Biscuit likes you better when you've got snacks. Ethan laughed, a real one, from somewhere deep, the kind that surprises you, the kind that means something is good and you're in it, and for once you're not counting the minutes until it ends. He went down the steps, into the warm afternoon, toward the boy and the dog and the children, and the whole bright life he'd built out of one folded dollar and a choice, because that's what his grandfather finally understood. Too late. In a letter by a cold fireplace in a mountain house full of silence, the thing that cost him 18 years and a son he couldn't save. Love is not the thing you keep. Love is the thing you give away. The big half. Every time. Even when you're hungry. Even when there isn't enough. Especially then. And somewhere, Ethan thought, wherever good men go when the world is finally done being unfair to them, a father he never met and a grandfather he forgave were watching a yard full of children laugh in the afternoon sun, and he hoped they were proud.